I gave a sermon one time, shortly, I think, after I started attending with you folks, over in when we were meeting in the basement of our good friend John Shelton's. And I entitled it, or gave it a title, "Are We Thankful for the Clothes We Wear?" Well, today's sermon could be titled, if you want a title for it, "Are We Thankful for the Food We Eat?" For most people, even people in the church, don't know, a lot of people don't know where the food comes from, or by which process it is made available. Now, I've mentioned before in sermons and so forth, how I was raised on a farm in Southwest Virginia, and even today I live on a farm. I understand the process of producing food, grain, vegetables, and livestock, but most people don't understand. They just know they go to the store and buy their food. That's all they know. Agriculture is the science, art, and business of cultivating the soil, producing crops, and raising livestock. We call it farming. That's just farming. As we read through the Bible, we can see that Israel's society remained basically an agricultural society throughout biblical times. And according to Micah 4:4, it may seem to indicate that it will be an agricultural society during the millennium as well. It says, every man shall sit under his own vine and under his own fig tree. But although cities and towns developed in Israel as early as the time of King David and Solomon, both Old and New Testaments contain many references to agricultural customs and practices. Back in Genesis 2:15, when God made the first man Adam, it says, "And the Lord took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress and to keep it." Therefore, the Bible indicates that one of man's basic tasks was to till, keep, and take care of the land. So we see that man is seen as being with divinely given ability to be a gardener or a farmer. Now, I can hear people say now, "Nah, not me." Not me. I could never be a farmer or gardener. I don't want to get that dirt under my fingernails. Well, how do you know? Unless you try it, you might like it. Now, I realize some people don't have any land in which to till, or raise garden, or to raise livestock. For a lot of us were born, into a society of, and we don't have where we don't have a certain amount of land to do so. Of course, some people are just too lazy to grow anything, even if they did have the land. And again, I know there are variables even to this, for some folks may not be physically able to till the soil. As a matter of fact, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to till the soil. But I'm speaking in general terms here. However, man's close relationship with the soil is indicated by the similarity by two Hebrew words. Adam, first man Adam, he came from the earth. And the earth itself, Adamea. And, the word Adam, as I said, it means he came from the earth. That's what it means. But whether or not we grow our food, whether or not we grow our own food, there is a sense of self-satisfaction in doing that, if you've ever done it. Do we appreciate it? We go to the store and we buy all kinds of food, what we eat, even if we can't garden. But do we appreciate it? Do we appreciate the method in which we get our food? And do we appreciate the people who feeds us? And of course, who is behind all this? As of 2014, there was 308.9 million people living in the United States. And, that's 2 years ago or 3 years ago. We know the number has gone up since then. In comparison, there's very few people who feed us all. 90% of all produce which the American people eats comes from only 2 states, California and Florida. Most of the other 10%, not all, but most, is imported from south of the border. Bananas, pineapples, and a lot of our tropical fruits. Most all the grain we eat comes from a few Midwestern states, just a few. So, therefore, a very few states out of the entire 50 feeds us all. It feeds an entire nation. Do we appreciate these people and their efforts when we go to the grocery store? Most people don't. But we should. Most of all, do we appreciate who gave these people the ability and the knowledge to do this? For it is no small task. And the old farmer gets very little in comparison to the distributors, the people who distribute his product. The old farmer, he might get $3 for a bushel of wheat, but when you go to the store, you'll give $3 for a loaf of bread. And how many loaves of bread are in a bushel of wheat? Now, I know there's some expenses involved in it all, but the producer of the product gets very little in comparison to what other people are getting for his efforts. Now, let's go to Deuteronomy 8 and get some consideration from the Lord himself about agriculture. Deuteronomy 8. Deuteronomy 8, let's start in verse 6. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord your God has brought you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and deeps, that springs out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey. And we know he was talking to Israel then, but we can add we're Israel too. And we've been given a good land as well. And we could add a whole lot more agricultural products to this list here in the United States. Verse 9, it says, a land where you shall eat bread without scarceness. You shall not lack anything in it. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you may dig brass. That's us, folks. That's not just the ancient Israelites. That's us today, here in the United States. Verse 10, when you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Do we do that? For the most part, no, we do not. We live in a land where most people don't appreciate anything, much less the one who has made it possible for them to have it. Verse 11, God says, beware that you forget not the Lord your God in keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command you this day. Lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses to live in, and when your when your herds and flocks multiply, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, that your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God. Verse 17, and you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. That's us. We have forgotten God. We're full, we've eaten, we're full, we've got houses to live in, and we think that somehow we did this all on our own. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he that gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore unto your fathers, as it is this day. And it shall be, if you do at all forget the Lord your God, and walk after other gods, and serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day that you shall surely perish. That's where America has come, and that's where we are going. We have forgotten God, for we are full, we have plenty to eat, and if you don't believe that, first of all, we can go look in the mirror. I know I can. And if that don't convince you, go and sit in the Walmart parking lot and watch the people go in and out. Now, I don't want anyone to get peeved at me for saying what I say. I'm not pointing myself at anyone for being overweight. I am overweight myself, and I know it. The point being, do we appreciate what we have that allows us to get this way? For when people are full and happy, they tend to forget God. We in the church cannot allow that to happen to us, no matter how much He gives us to eat. So we see from Scripture, God includes in a nation's wealth, any nation, all these agricultural products. A nation is not only wealthy by gold and silver, that's not what makes us wealthy, but also by the availability of its food sources. And we have lived for so long with availability of plenty of food, we have forgotten where it comes from and the one who provides the methods for producing it. And, of course, that would include rain in due season and fertile soil as well. We also see that through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they moved about within Palestine and were concerned primarily with looking after their flocks. They were also involved in farming. Isaac, for example, was instantly aware of the smell of the field on Esau's clothes, and he prayed that Jacob might be blessed with plenty of grain and wine, which is agricultural products. That's in Genesis 27, 27, 28, by the way. I may give you several scriptures here. I have them written down. I'm not going to turn to a lot of them, but you can jot them down. If you want to look them up at your convenience, you can do so. When the Israelites settled in the land of Canaan, they were confined to the heavily wooded hill country, while the Canaanites continued in the valleys and along the coast. For according to Judges 1, 27, 28, we can see that they did not drive them out of the land as they were instructed to do. They were supposed to drive these people out of the land, but they didn't. And it caused them a lot of grief down the road. The Israelites, therefore, began the long process of having to clear these forests. The uplands of Ephraim and Judah, as well as the land east of the Jordan River, were gradually made suitable for cultivation. 1 Kings 4:25. During the time of David and Solomon, agricultural activity prospered. It says, "And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon." So we can see agriculture prospered under these kings. In Ezekiel 27:17, it is speaking of all the people that traded with Tyre. It tells us Judah and the land of Israel even exported some agricultural products such as wheat, honey, oil, and balm. 1 Corinthians 27, 26 through 31, and also 2 Corinthians 32, 28. It shows us that certain kings, such as David and Hezekiah, took special interest in agriculture and in agricultural production. But none more than King Uzziah, I guess, Uzziah. He was described as one who loved husbandry, which is the tilling of the soil and raising food. That's in 2 Chronicles 26:10. You can read about him. Agriculture was also important in New Testament times. Jesus made frequent frequent reference to land and its products in his teachings, which indicated that he and the people he were talking to, his hearers, were quite familiar with agricultural practices. In Matthew 13, Jesus gives us 4 agricultural parables. The parable of the sower, which is in verse 1 through 23. He gives us the parable of the wheat and the tares. That's in verses 24 through 30 and 36 through 43. He gives us the parable of the mustard seed, verses 31 and 32 of Matthew 13. And he gives us the parable of the treasure hidden in the field, verse 44. Other New Testament writers also referred to agricultural matters. In Galatians 6, 7 through 10, Paul talks about reaping and sowing. So he understood agricultural practices. In Romans 11, 17 through 24, we don't have time to read all this, but you can look later. Paul also speaks of the cultivation of olive trees when addressing the Gentiles, about the Gentiles coming into the church. So he understood the analogy there. And James referred to the farmer patiently waiting for rain in due season, or in reference to us patiently waiting for the second coming of Christ. So he used an agricultural analogy there as well. Then, back in Deuteronomy chapter 28, the whole chapter, the Lord gave the Israelites a list of blessings and curses, and this includes us as well. It continually stresses that success and prosperity in agriculture comes from God, and that His blessings was closely associated with the people's trust in Him and their obedience to His word. This agricultural labor was tied up with the spiritual and moral attitude of the people. It had a connection. Well, we all know the moral attitude of the people in California, don't we? And up till just recently, those people out there was in a four-year drought, I think. They pumped so much water out of the underground aquifers to water their crops, the ground is sinking, folks. Some places as much as 30 foot. It's where they've took the water out of these underground chambers. And remember, California is one of the states which provides us for half or more of all produce we consume in the U.S. Could morality have something to do with that? Of course it does. And one thing we need to be mindful of is that thanksgiving and worship are due to the Lord for multiplying their crops and flocks came through Israel's festivals, which are closely associated with the agricultural year. It's amazing how God's plan of salvation is related to food production. Agricultural. They're in tune with the harvest seasons which the Israelites had. Everybody understands that without food we die. And the best way for the Israelites to be reminded of their dependence on God was through their harvest seasons. Of course, we today understand them with far greater significance than they did. We know they spell out the plan for our eternal salvation, not just our physical salvation. Started with Passover, and the days of unleavened bread was celebrated at the beginning of the barley harvest. This was followed 50 days later by the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, with the offering of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. The Feast of Tabernacles, or Ingathering, took place when the last grape and olive harvest of the year was complete. Of course, we have other fall holy days as well, but they center around these agricultural harvests. And there's a lot of lessons in all this. If only I had time to dig them out for you. Hold them out for you. Because these festivals sometimes degenerated into the mere performance of ritualism. The prophets brought a further reminder that the Lord, not Baal, was the true Lord of the harvest. In Hosea 2:8, the Lord, speaking through the mouth of Hosea, says this, "For she did not know that I, the Lord, gave her grain, new wine, and oil," speaking of his nation Israel. And that would include, as I said, us today. We don't know where our wealth and food comes from either here in the United States. And neither do we as a nation give thanks to the one that makes it possible. In addition to the three main crops, grain, grapes, and olives, a variety of fruits and vegetables was also grown in biblical times. The importance of vegetables is indicated by Ahab's desire to turn Naboth's vineyard into a vegetable garden. I'm running a little over here. Melons, cucumbers, leeks, herbs, and spices probably were grown in the kitchen gardens of the nobility, while the poor had to be content with beans and lentils, which were often grown between the vines of other crops, according to the information I came across. Now, of course, that may be pure speculation on the part of some historians. For I know when I was growing up in Southwest Virginia, we did eat a lot of beans and potatoes. No lentils, but potatoes. We also had melons, green onions, tomatoes, fresh green beans, and a whole host of other vegetables. And all these summer fruits were eagerly awaited, as I suppose the Israelites also did, as a refreshing supplement to their regular diet. For the Israelites, figs, pomegranates seem to have been particularly popular. And the prophet Amos was involved in the production of cattle and a gather of sycamore fruit, or wild figs. Dates were cultivated in the Jericho region, and nuts such as almonds were also enjoyed according to Genesis 43:11. Different fruits for different parts of the world, but it's all food, agricultural products. Food is important to the wealth of any nation, more so than silver and gold. For we are told in Ezekiel 7, where God speaks of the final desolation of Israel, which includes us here in the good old United States. He says this, Ezekiel 7:19, "They shall cast their silver into the streets, and their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their souls, neither shall they fill their stomachs, because it is the stumbling block of their iniquity." So when you've got no food to buy with your silver and gold, it becomes worthless, doesn't it? The desire to make more money, God says, is the stumbling block of His people. And we see that today, not realizing that food is actually more important than money. And the puzzling thing is, we complain about all the good things we have to eat. We've got more than anybody in the world, and we complain about it. Well, there's a time coming, folks, and I'm afraid it's not too far around the corner, when God's people, as a nation, will have to eat things that would make a billy goat puke to survive and be glad to get it. You know, it's going to come to that. Yet I wonder, even then, will they give thanks to God? I pray that we in the church never forget how blessed we are to have food and plenty of it at the present. I know sometimes our food is not exactly to our taste, but a lot of times that's just because we have such a variety to choose from. So let's never forget how important agriculture is to the wealth and well-being of our nation. And let us never forget to thank God for the food we eat, for it is truly the greatest blessing that we can have in this physical life.